Welcome to the RocketMSP podcast. I'm your host, Steve Taylor. The following is an interview with Sean Morris, CTO of TitanHQ. TitanHQ started as an email security platform and has since added email archiving and web security services to their portfolio. I wanted to interview Sean to learn what it's like to be the CTO of a large services provider and ask some basic questions about how MSPs should get started in cybersecurity if they have not yet. Keep listening for the entire interview. Hey, how's it going, Sean?
Great, Steve. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, man. So, thanks for popping on here today. Sean, you are the CTO over at TitanHQ.
That's correct.
All right. So, how did you get to be the CTO? Like, what does your journey look like?
That's well, as you can see, I'm getting on a bit. But yeah, it's been an interesting journey. So I suppose I'm a physics grad, which is kind of a weird place to start a career in IT, but an awful lot of us have gone that route. I spent quite a bit of time in the software development world, in telco, in telecoms industry, more so on the equipment manufacturer side, and that kind of. But I always wanted to be in IT. I actually kind of had a craving for the technology side of things from an early age, and wanted to be kind of in the thick of it. So I went from there to a small system integrator in the early noughties, which was an exciting time for lots of reasons. And then working with a company there where we did a ton of interesting work. So I was kind of out with the customers, implementing lots of interesting systems, mainly CRM and stuff like that. But obviously those things have to be integrated. And then because that was a small company and that turned out to be an interesting time for a lot of the wrong reasons, I ended up moving from there to a company called Fidelity Investments, who I'm sure your listeners are very familiar with. So kind of ended up doing an awful lot of different things in Fidelity. I was there for 17 years and really kind of ended up with kind of a global role that spanned lots of different things at different points in time. But I guess what I carried forward from that into this role was a big focus on security and data and how that applies into the software development lifecycle, because we're a product company. We build products and services for the cybersecurity industry, and it's a big crossover. So that's, I suppose, where I took from that and brought that into the role I'm in today. I think you're on mute, Steve.
One of these days. I'll not do that in an episode. So, so as the CTO, you are in charge of kind of the product itself, but you're also in charge of all the security and the technology for TitanHQ for you guys to operate as a business as well.
Absolutely. We have two mantras in this company: security first and MSP first, right? So, certainly to talk with security first part, and it's kind of come to the fore, maybe more so than ever in the last 18 months, right?
Yeah.
The reality of supply chain attacks. There's always been, for me, I suppose I've done a lot of work on DevSecOps over the last 10, 15 years in my career. But this is where it becomes real, right? So are you really paying attention to how you are ensuring that every aspect of your business, your product, and your data are secure, right? So that's the security first part, and really focusing on those sort of domains, from a attack perspective, ensuring we're really as good as we possibly can be.
So I want this episode to be helpful for all MSPs, but I'm really going to be focused on questions that MSPs that have maybe fallen a little behind on their cybersecurity. I really want to focus on helping them because, you know, with the way the internet is, if they were to pop on Reddit and say, "Hey guys, how do I do better cybersecurity?" I would say at least 50% of the responses are going to say one type of mean thing or trolling or whatever, right? So you're almost discouraged to look to your peers for help in some of
Mhm.
these situations. So let's help them. Um, so let's start with the very basics. What is a cybersecurity framework?
Yeah, it's a confusing area, Steve. It has to be
Mhm.
said, and it took me personally quite a while to get to grips with it. So I'm pretty sympathetic to anybody who's confused. I mean, in a nutshell, it's essentially, I suppose, there are a lot of different ways of looking at it, but essentially, it's a way of describing, the things that you should think about and ultimately do to improve your cybersecurity posture, right? There are loads of them out there. I mean, there's
Mhm.
probably, I would argue, four that are important to pay attention to, depending on the type of industry you're in. But really, they are a way to get you going on the journey, right? It's never green fields, even if you are at the early stages of thinking about cybersecurity. It's never really green fields. You've always done something. You've got some awareness, right? In fact, these days, more people than ever have more awareness because there's so much media coverage on cybersecurity and the issues it kind of presents. So the framework gets you going to think about, okay, what are things I should be doing, and what are the areas I should think about in relation to cybersecurity in my business?
So, and I ask that because a lot of people are aware, like, I need to be doing cybersecurity, and maybe they just think that means, I need the products that TitanHQ sells and like antivirus, and that's it. But there's a lot more that goes into it, because when you pick a framework, you're basically saying, I have a bunch of rules that I'm gonna kind of follow, whether they are government regulated or audit based because of regulation or just requirements of your field, or you've just decided that these are the practices that I want to follow because I want my company to have a strong cybersecurity posture. I want to be uh, I want it to be really hard to get to our stuff. I know it's never impossible, but I want it to be really hard. So now we know what a framework is. And then there's another thing we hear about, and it's controls.
Hmm.
So is a framework different from controls?
Definitely, there's kind of a hierarchy in these things, right? And again, it's another area where there's an element of there's probably a formal definition somewhere, but how I think about it is the framework is the all the bits and pieces to think about in relation to cybersecurity, kind of the broad domain areas that you should focus on, whatever those might be, or practice areas. And again, that actually varies from framework to framework. They all have different ways of describing essentially the same thing. They do all overlap enormously. So in one sense, you can't go far wrong if you pick any framework. It's just a question of, is it best fit for your business at this point? But the controls thing, Steve, it's like if the framework is setting out the blueprint of the things you should think of in security, the controls are like the guardrails, right? So often almost synonymous with a process or a procedure, right? And the reason controls are important is in reality, if you do go to be certified, you want to be certified on SOC 2 or ISO 27000 or something like that, then the reality is that the visibility to that the controls are being followed, as in there's auditable evidence that you did the thing as often as it was supposed to be done, whatever you committed to. Um, that's the that's where the kind of rubber hits the road. So that's why controls are so important. And the other thing is, kind of controls are also great in that great from my point of view, not always from everyone else's point of view. They're great because they're there to remind everyone what it is that the best practices rather that we've decided we're going to follow in a given area with when no one's looking, right? So it sort of sets out that, and I suppose the policy might say, we ought to consider how we're going to deal with data security. Your controls around data security will articulate exactly what's expected from everyone based on their role, etc., in the organization.
And so you mentioned a couple like SOC 2 and ISO 27001. So there's not quite a few. There are tons of different cybersecurity frameworks, and sometimes businesses need to be proficient in more than one of them. So if we want to get like technical, so to speak, we could say that HIPAA and PCI are technically a cybersecurity framework, or more like a security framework, just to protect the healthcare data or credit card data. Um, but then there's also cybersecurity frameworks that are like global, and then there's the ones that are maybe specific to certain countries, like NIST and CMMC. Like these are specific to the United States. And while TitanHQ doesn't really need to adhere to those for their own country, because you guys are in Republic of Ireland, so that means you're EU, not UK. I know that can get confusing for some of us Americans. So because of that, you don't have to adhere to like NIST and CMMC and all that kind of stuff, right? But you also understand the importance of being able to tell your American customers, hey guys, I understand that, you need a vendor that can sign a BAA for HIPAA. So you might put things in place that allow you to, um, uh, help us with our controls on our end. So so here's where I get a little confused is, okay, so like ISO 27001, that is like a global, that's like just a third party organization of companies and just really smart people all came together around the globe and they put together that framework. I know CMMC is American, so is NIST. What is CIS? Is that global or specific to America?
I actually don't know a lot about CIS,
Okay.
but
I just hear that one a little more frequently these days.
Yeah, I'd say from our point of view, sitting in the kind of the product technology realm, it tends to be a combination of SOC 2 is extremely popular. I mean, that's for almost every industry, but certainly for companies that are in the technology realm, SOC 2 is a highly valued certification, and it has a kind of an element of, you can start with security and availability and extend to processing and other aspects of your business over time, right? So you can extend certification right across different domains. ISO is definitely international. In fact, I would say both are international, completely international and global in scope. ISO covers an awful lot of very similar ground. It just approaches it differently. It approaches it through the concept of establish, implement, maintain, and sort of evolve your security posture and looking at information security systems from the point of view of your business. So you kind of have again another way of parsing out what it is you should be thinking about. I think when you get to the NIST and CMMC, yes, they're US specific. I think where they differentiate in my mind, NIST is voluntary. It's just like ISO in a way. NIST and ISO are general standards organizations that happen to have a specific and I suppose very well thought of, if I want to put it that way, cybersecurity framework. That's kind of an orientating thing to think about in terms of your efforts there. Whereas CMMC is in reality is a Department of Defense requirement that's becoming mandatory fairly shortly, 2026, which will fly by, I'm sure, for a lot of people. So that,
And to clarify, I believe that's going to be mandatory for companies that have like government contracts, not
yes.
for like, the candy store down the road isn't going to have to adhere to CMMC, but if you're working in like the government sector, but you're still a private business, then that's where you'll have to understand and adhere to CMMC. And I know that uh, they already kind of tossed it aside and came out or mentioned or however it works with like CMMC 2.0, because I think they already realized that 1.0 was just a little a little extreme, and it probably should have been that
Mm,
extreme, but it also made it really difficult for people too.
mm,
So I think that how do I want to say this? While I think we all agree that cybersecurity should be, super important, I think we can also agree that, sometimes if there's too many barriers, people just won't do it. So I think that's why they're looking to simplify CMMC in some regard.
yeah. I would say that certainly from the point of view that CMMC is a maturity model, that they've taken at least out of the off the starting blocks a reasonably good approach, because you can gain levels of maturity over time, and maybe those levels of maturity, and I don't know the ins and outs of this, if you like, open up more opportunities for you in terms of where you can play in that particular sort of realm. I do think, though, that there is one thing, Steve, that's a watch area for MSPs, particularly in this space, which is that with the supply chain focus, and of course, in this particular, in the Department of Defense side of things, we're seeing cyber warfare becoming it's incredibly real. I mean, even just recently in the Ukraine, that's how kind of part of that conflict is kicking off right now, from a Russian perspective. So I suspect that if you're part of the chain of supply to a Department of Defense contractor, that may also require you to step up on this as well. So it's probably something that's worth investigating, for your listeners to think about. Where do I sit in this? If I'm a candy shop, no problem, right? You're probably not in that particular supply chain, but maybe you are somewhere in that supply chain, in which case that could be a knock-on from a business perspective to watch out for.
And what I want to do is I want to have a conversation with you about Ukraine at the end, and I want to turn that into a special clip that won't be like part of the episode. People will have to listen to that separately, but that won't be too long. That I'm thinking maybe a 10-minute conversation for that. Um, all right, so earlier I mentioned that there are all these different types of controls, and sometimes you might have to, or I'm sorry, frameworks or whatever they are, right? So uh, sometimes you might have to, you know, check off boxes on more than one list, right? So a doctor's office,
Mm,
they are by regulation required to be compliant with HIPAA, right? But they may also say, we know we have to do HIPAA, but maybe I'm one of the crazy doctors and I want to be focused on security because I know it's the right thing to do. So I'm also going to say, I want my office to be compliant with NIST.
mm,
And so the nice thing is that there are ways for, and there's probably like a list out there somewhere where it says like, okay, these boxes that you can check off for NIST correlate with these boxes on HIPAA.
I don't think it's that simple, to be honest. I think that there is overlap. I think
And I don't think that you're going to check off, I don't think one will check off all the boxes.
yeah.
But I think it's fair to say that if you're looking at, uh, well, I saw a document on a cybersecurity vendor that they do security at I think the technical term is the perimeter of the network. So it's on the firewall. So
Yeah.
they are able to say, here's what we're able to help you. Here's how our product aligns with certain controls. So they were able to say, this feature, and they were able to list off all the different boxes it checks off for the different frameworks.
Yeah.
Now, every framework was not necessarily in every row, right?
Mhm.
So I understand that, like, just because a product has a boatload of features doesn't mean it's going to technically check off a box with every single cybersecurity framework, because let's just say something simple. Maybe one framework doesn't have retention policy for how long you
Mhm.
keep your logs, and another one does.
Yeah.
So if it says you need to review things in your firewall, great, you can check off that box. But if it says you need to keep the logs for 10 years and you're not doing that, it doesn't check off that box. So, and I know
Yeah.
I'm grossly oversimplifying this, but I'm also trying to talk to the guys that maybe are still trying to understand. And this is a huge thing to wrap your hand around.
I'm having trouble hearing you.
Siri, are you drunk? I was like, oh.
I hope you just answered that question, Steve. That's all I'm saying.
Even Siri doesn't know what we're talking about. That's all I'm trying to say, Sean.
Well, I think you hit on a good point there, and it's funny that there's kind of some philosophical differences between these standards as well, right? So, but they have, generally speaking, one thing in common, which is there's a bedrock of stuff that's kind of required to meet a minimum standard, and then there's what you're willing to commit to on top of that, and a lot of it comes down to doing what you said you would do, right? So whenever we're audited, we're not so much audited versus a standard that is, SOC 2, because we are SOC 2 certified. We're audited versus a standard of SOC 2 plus what we said we would do and what our controls are committing us to as an organization, right? And I think that that's a really critical differentiator, which is being certified versus a framework doesn't actually really guarantee you being highly sort of secure from a cybersecurity perspective. It's the work you do as part of certification and your general culture and your kind of posture and how you think about this stuff that really drives that sort of mindset and result for your business. So I mean, just to give you a simple example, right? A good example of a requirement, certainly for SOC 2 and probably for every standard is, do you do risk management? Do you have a risk register? Do your senior team meet to review that on a regular basis? Is it comprehensive? Is it updated regularly? All that sort of stuff. It's almost like probably, to your kind of starting point, something that a lot of small companies would not necessarily even think of. But it's the discipline of actually doing those meetings and having the conversations that is the control. But what you decide in those meetings is kind of how you then influence the outcome for your own business from a security perspective.
So, for people that are like, I don't even understand what I'm just going to pick NIST, okay? Because I know where to find some things with NIST. So, again, this one's voluntary. There's no audit or regulations unless you want to get. If you want to get into regulations, that's something else. If you want to get audited, I'm sure that there are companies out there that would do third-party audits to your documentation to make sure that you are doing what you say you will do. Though that's a very real thing, but it's not a required audit process to say that you adhere to NIST. It's not a regulatory compliance that you have to do. So with NIST, it's called the NIST CSF Cybersecurity Framework, and they have a document. It's called Framework for Improving Critical Infrastructure Security. The latest version is 1.1, and that's from April 16th, 2018. And let's be honest, some things probably need to be updated after the last 18 months. However, this document, the title sounds scary, right? Framework for Improving Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity. That sounds like it's going to be an intense book, and you're like, where's the For Dummies version? But this document, including the appendices, is 55 pages. And and you might even be thinking, wow, that's a lot of pages for like a PDF. I was looking for like a 3-page explainer.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think this is probably going to be like the easiest explainer that you can get. Now, Sean, have you read this document?
No, I have not.
I haven't either. There's a lot of words that are big, and there's a lot of acronyms. So if I look here, though, like in the table of contents, it has, once you get past all the acknowledgments and the executive summary and all that, they've got 21 pages of actual stuff to read, right? So they go from the framework intro to basics to how to use the framework, self-assessing cybersecurity risk with the framework. And then, like I said, they've got appendices. They literally have 25 pages of appendices, okay? So, and for those of you that don't know what I'm saying, it's appendix, but plural. So they've got over 20 pages just of framework core appendix. And then they've got a glossary and an explanation of what some of these acronyms mean. So it really, if you think about it, like, okay, if I just wanted to read about it and not dig into some of this stuff, maybe it's only 20 pages or 21 pages, right? That doesn't seem as scary as 55. 55 really shouldn't be hard. Like, for some people, you should be reading books, and 55 pages isn't a very long book. It's going to be an intense book, but it's not a very hard book. So I'm going to challenge myself to read this month, because I want to better serve you guys, the MSP community, and have a better understanding of how this stuff works. But when you do go through this thing, you're going to learn that there's different functions within the NIST framework, like identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And then within those functions, there's going to be categories and subcategories of the different things that you should be doing. And they're not saying you should have antivirus and you should have spam filtering. I think they're a little more vague in what they're saying. Am I correct, Sean?
Exactly, and that's exactly it, Steve. As I said, it's a set of kind of list of things to think about, and even as you kind of outline the sort of the headings, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, they're trying to get you thinking about the whole area holistically, and then give you the next layer of things to think about. And maybe there's some best practices highlighted in there, but you can't document all the things that people should think about, because, as you know, it's all moving along so quickly, right?
Well, not only that, but let's say, I've got a checklist for NIST. Like, that checklist might be great for one customer, because maybe you use that one customer to build it. But customer 2 over here, well, maybe their business is bigger, and it's a bigger beast to tame, right? So you might actually need a few extra tools to get the job done, or you may need a few extra concepts to think about. Maybe not necessarily tools to accomplish, but maybe you need to check off a couple extra boxes within a tool just because of the size and nature of a business. So when you think about your cybersecurity framework, it's not, here's a list of all the things and all the things I need to do, and there we go, now we're compliant with NIST. Like, it doesn't work that way, right?
I honestly think that's the worst possible outcome. It's that you kind of dust your hands off and say, yeah, I'm all set here, time to crack open a beer and not worry about anything. I kind of come at it from a completely different point of view, which is these are great kind of guardrails and things to think about and prompts. But just like the training wheels on a bike when you were a kid, you kind of should grow out of them and move past them and almost start to have your own opinion by virtue of your knowledge of your own or your customer's business. What's the best fit solution that gives them the best bang for the buck on security for them? What are the things that they're worried about, right? I mean, we talked about healthcare earlier. That's been a really hot spot for ransomware attacks, right? So that might be their focus. They might consider that from their own business perspective a really high-risk thing. So that then becomes a higher level of focus. And then you start to think about tools that are, or maybe from their budget perspective, where's the best place to spend money from the point of view of what they're concerned most about from a risk perspective. But I think that's the allure and danger of frameworks all rolled into one, is that it makes you feel like you're being successful, but in reality, you still have to think for yourself independently and figure this stuff out, right?
So let's make some recommendations now. It's important for MSPs to understand which frameworks that their customers have to adhere to. Like, if you want to support medical practices and companies that have patient data, then you need to understand HIPAA, and at least on the technology side, understand what things you can and can't do. Not should or shouldn't. You need to understand what you can and can't, right?
Yeah.
Because there are things that you literally can't do by law, right?
Yeah.
I can't just call the doctor's office and say, hey, I heard Tom Brady goes there. What's he seeing you for? They can't just tell me that. It's not that they shouldn't, which they shouldn't, but they literally can't. It's a law, okay? So those are can and can't. But you should also decide, like, okay, so if there are frameworks that are voluntary, right? So I decide I want to use NIST or ISO or whatever. There's a bunch of the voluntary ones too, I'm sure. But I think NIST and ISO are probably the two biggest. You argued earlier that there are 4 frameworks that are really important. I'm sure NIST and ISO are 2 of them.
Yeah.
What are the other 2?
I would say SOC 2 and CMMC.
Okay.
Right.
So you should, as somebody who's saying, I don't know where to begin, I think the first thing that they should be doing, or you should be doing, is read about these different frameworks. And if you say, okay, I want all of my customers to be compliant with NIST, or I want what I'm doing for them to be compliant with NIST for whatever reason, right? Then learn NIST and learn how to use it. But if you work with medical, you need to learn HIPAA. If you work with clients that maybe you work with a lot of retail clients, then you need to familiarize yourself with PCI DSS. And then if you're going to work with government contract companies, that type of, where they're working with DoD, then familiarize yourself with CMMC and start working towards certification there. But I think that you need to, like, pick a framework. I think every MSP needs to pick a voluntary framework, and they need to start figuring out, like, how do my tools, my software stack, whatever you want to think of it as, how does this align with my framework?
Yeah.
And start to figure that out. And what is the best approach to figuring out how all of these tools can align with the framework?
So we've actually given a lot of thought to this for our own business, Steve, and I think the way we define our own I suppose, security posture, our roadmap, everything we're doing and have done and will continue to do on security, we take a threat-led model. So, the frameworks there, we're obviously highly kind of aware of our certification on that and continue to stay certified, and there's value in that in its own right. But we kind of look at it through the lens of, look at all the potential things that could happen to us from a cybersecurity perspective, all the threat vectors, right? There's threat vectors for your company, for your systems, your data, and for your product. And you really kind of have to sit down, and we do this on a very regular basis, right? Sit down and go through what are all those threat vectors, right? And look at what we've done and assess it critically, really kind of, it's kind of a, think about it through the worst case scenario. Have we really done what's necessary to protect us in this situation? Do we have the right things in place? And that then, leads you into the roadmap of what do we need to do next, right? I think to your point about the, people getting familiar with the frameworks, I think that's, it is a journey. You've got to go out and read and explore and talk to people and learn more. But I think we sell the tools, so we're very cognizant of the value they add, right? They add an enormous amount of value. But I think from the point of view of this conversation, it's great if you can think about the threat that the tool prevents, right? And how that fits into the risks you're trying to manage for your business. And then you're making the right choice because you've actually got the why all sorted out up front as to why. And in fact, from the point of view of an MSP, the real value there on top of all that is when you're actually discussing it with your customer, you're not just saying you should install X. You've got the whole, this is the threats you're potentially facing as a business. This is how this will protect you from that, how it fits into a broader picture. And ultimately then it becomes a really easy sell. You should implement, the whatever the tool is you want to implement, right? So that's how I think about it anyway.
All right. I like that. And it's, it's kind of twofold. One, you've got all these tools that you currently have. You need to figure out, I'm going to keep using the metaphor, which boxes do they check off as part of that framework, right? And do you have a bunch of overlap? Like, do you have two tools that are checking off the same boxes?
Mm-hmm.
Do you need to be using both of them? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Does it make sense for you to actually have both, or can you just use one? And that's that other thing where it's like, I know security is like an onion, but I always think of it like, 10 years ago, I remember you don't want to have two different antivirus apps running on the computer because then they'll just fight. Like when one's doing its job, then the other's going to see the one and be like, oh, this is a virus, but it's just antivirus software. So, or that was always the fable that we told each other. So, so with that, should we have like, okay, we can get the spam filter by TitanHQ, but should we use that and then like iron scales with it? Like at what point are we just creating overlap and just paying for tools to have tools?
That's a great question. I am biased, Steve, just to put that on the table up front. But
I understand.
But that being said, right, and I would say, no one wants to see anyone waste money, right? I mean, we should all be, and I know that TitanHQ is definitely in the business of creating value for our customers, right? That's the number one goal here. That being said, right, it kind of comes down to understanding what you're trying to achieve. So, to take a specific example, so what's the threat you're worried about? Is it phishing and ransomware? Okay, well, what's the sort of measures you're going to take to prevent that? Well, you can actually do lots of different things, right? You can certainly filter email, and we've just launched late last year, link rewriting, which is a great way to stop ransomware getting into your business. Obviously, from a spam filtering perspective, are you checking incoming emails for malware, etc., for dodgy attachments? All that is part of it. The origin of your emails, all those sort of things from a spoofing perspective, and so on. But there's another aspect there which is, have you trained your staff? Have you got a good phishing simulation model in place, right? And we're actually about to make a pretty exciting announcement on that front as well. So stay tuned for that at some point in the very, very near future. But it's kind of that thinking about the holistic kind of layers of defense. It may well be that you choose for one vendor for one part of that and another for another part. Obviously, there could be a configuration thing. There could be something there that's kind of not, how I put it, you're doubling up for no good reason. But more often than not, I would imagine when this is being designed and implemented, the goal should be to have overlaps that are helpful, right? And actually add value.
And maybe it's and this is I'm going to plead ignorance, okay? Maybe the TitanHQ spam filter is like really great at looking for one type of email threat, and then there's another product that's really great for looking at a different type of email threat. So maybe you're doubling up because while they're both checking off the same boxes, you want to make sure that you're protecting from all the different types of threats. Because even though email is a single threat vector in a certain way, there are different types of threats. So sometimes it's phishing, and sometimes it's a malware link, and there's just different types of threats. And I'm not going to expect you to say, oh, well, yeah, our software is not very good at this, but the MSPs may have found that they have better success using one type of software for one type of threat and another software for a different type. And that's okay, as long as they know that that's why there's the overlap, right?
Yeah. And the other thing to keep in mind there is that, it's an interesting time in the cybersecurity industry generally. There's a lot of investment. Things are moving forward pretty fast. We're expanding as a business extremely rapidly. We're private equity backed. We're now, really focusing in on heavy engineering investment in further improving products and getting that sort of extensibility and coverage. So there ultimately comes down to, like everything else, what you think your real need is, what's the right value point for the problem you're trying to solve, and there's all sorts of other factors that can come into play there. But certainly, we feel like we've got a great solution at a really great price point in terms of how we cover spam filtering, anti-phishing as well now, a big part of our focus, and of course the web filtering and email archival space as well. So it really comes in one sense. It's the other aspect to consider there, Steve, is you mentioned kind of the antivirus stuff fighting on the PC and days of old, but there is also that kind of interoperability that can give you, an integration that can give you sort of additional synergies as well. That's a big focus for us in our roadmap right now.
I like that. And I think we touched on this earlier, but it's more than just tools. There are other things that an MSP should be doing for their clients if we say we want to be, compliant with NIST or whatever the right way to say that is, right? Yeah. So it could be more like, all right, I know I'm going to put a spam filter in place, but another piece is I also need somebody reviewing the logs and seeing, what kind of data is in the logs. And can you talk about like what should we be looking for in these logs, these really long lists of text and blah?
That's that's a great question. And definitely, I've loads of people on my team who could answer it, but I'd probably be one of the worst people to ask that question of. What I would
Well,
say
and to clarify, I'm not asking you like what error codes. Like I just mean in like a general.
right, okay. Well, I would say, I mean, the way we're organized, we use, we use systems to actually help us understand what's going on in logs and activity across our company, right? And in one sense, the monitoring of the logs and you're looking for anomalous activity, that's a configuration aspect. You can find a dozen, IDRs that can look at that information and give you output. It's actually the understanding, I suppose, the technical expertise within your organization to be able to say, okay, so here's the things we're really worried about. We want to make certain we flag these up and that goes to the right people, and that if someone's out, that there's somebody else who's going to see that alert. That type of. So it's interesting you bring up the logging and monitoring and alerting space, Steve, because it's such a hugely important area from a security perspective. I think that the tooling part, you got to get it right, but the process behind that, or I suppose it overlays it in terms of what happens. That's a perfect example of a control, right? What's your monitoring control associated with monitoring and alerting, right? How does that actually, what action does it drive when something happens? How do you decide that the alert is a false positive if you're going to close it off? What's the action if it turns out that it is not a false positive? This is real, it needs further investigation. And what sort of timeline or SLA should your customer expect in terms of that monitoring activity, right? So there is for me, it's always all about the process. The tools are the enabler, right?
And that's exactly it. The tools are a piece of this pie that is cybersecurity. And I mean, if you're like me, like I love pie, so you should eat all of it, not just a piece. Eat the whole pie.
Yeah.
So we know we've got the tools, and we've got like logs and other things that we should be reviewing. And then I think that even if it's a voluntary framework that we decide we're working on and that's it, that's fine. You got to start somewhere, right? You should still also be doing something to like self audit. So, okay, I say I'm doing all of these things. Now, maybe this employee should go look around and make sure that we're actually doing what we're saying we're doing. And if we're not, I'm not going to say it's okay, but you can't like beat yourselves up about it. What needs to happen is, oh, we have a deficiency we didn't realize we had. Now we've got a hole to patch. And that's the most, that I mean, I think they're all the most important thing, right? But that is the most important thing in some regards, because you need to know what you're not doing right.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's critical. I mean, that's back to the culture thing in the first place, Steve, which is people should feel like it's safe to share that they've found an issue and it's not quite right, or there's an opportunity to improve, and that it's not going to be judged or someone's going to get upset about it or whatever, because that's where the real problems build up in the background, right? I think the point of so what's a good mechanism to actually drive that process, right? It's certainly a question I spend a lot of time thinking about is, but certainly the one that we do. One example of one thing we do, I suppose, would be business continuity planning tabletop, right? Which sounds kind of complicated, but actually, what you do is you bring all the important people into the room. Yeah, you have one person, in our case, our head of security, and they come up with a scenario, which is something's happened. We got an alert. We've seen this information. It looks like it's real. What do we do now? And the great thing about that exercise is that it forces everyone to understand the framework, the policies, the controls, the processes, the tools. You've got to kind of have, you've got to navigate all that in the simulation, right? And I suppose if you can think of it, it's a bit like Dungeons and Dragons, a bit like, so the head of security is the dungeon master, and the rest of you are working your way through that maze of this is the problem that we've just been presented with, and how do we use what we have at our disposal to figure out how to actually get through this, and what are the things we should do. And what's great about those processes, and we do it every 6 months, right? And they are intense. Everyone's very engaged because it feels real, which is what is great about it, right? It's but it also you find your deficiencies pretty quickly. Whether it's do people even know what the procedure is they're supposed to be following? You know, that's kind of it's sort of finding the information you need to use fast is kind of a basic starting point, right? But you'd be surprised how that can can be a blocker to start with, at least. But it gets everyone educated, and it's like a training session, but you're making it, the stakes are high and it counts, and you're kind of scoring yourself on it as well as a team. So
I gotta say, I love that, Sean. But that brings up the awkward conversation now. For some of these MSPs where it's just one guy, it's going to be really awkward for him to play D&D by himself.
That's right. Yeah, that's true.
So how does he do it? What does the one man MSP do to make sure he's doing it right?
I think that's part of the value proposition you're bringing to the table, Steve. You gotta have friends, right? You've got to have people that you can talk to that will give you a point of view, especially if you're operating by yourself. You've got to figure out a way to get some external insight on these things. I mean, none of us is that good, to be honest. That's the reality. You can know an awful lot. The trick is, in some respects, with all this, is to figure out what you can learn off your own bat as you go along, and what are things you don't want to learn the hard way, right? Especially at the expense of the customer. That's obviously the most important.
And I too have some fun announcements coming soon in that regard. So you guys will need to stay tuned to RocketMSP for that. So don't forget, we're going to have that other conversation about Ukraine, but I want to wrap this conversation up with one last, I'm going to call it topic. I want to break this down into a checklist, but before you tell me we can't make a checklist out of a cybersecurity framework, hear me out. If you saw an MSP that maybe they're just doing like antivirus and TitanHQ spam filter, while you're happy they're using TitanHQ spam filtering, there's a lot more that they need to do. What do you tell them? Like here, and I'm just going to say an arbitrary number. It's okay if you tell me we need to change the number. I need you to do these 5 things if you want to be able to improve not just your cybersecurity posture, but your knowledge on how to use and implement cybersecurity in a meaningful way.
Yeah, it's so there's almost like 2 layers you could attack that kind of question at, right? There's what are the basics? So what's the basic checklist? Just things that you should kind of nail on the wall in front of you and think about every day. And if you kind of can cover those, you're probably going to be improving your situation pretty quickly. And then there's the bigger picture, which maybe is, for bigger organizations to consider, right? And
that's true, but I think as MSPs, we've gotten to a point where I think we all need to look at the bigger picture. Okay. So I don't want to say you should have an antivirus and a spam filter and this and this and this. No. I'm saying let's break this down to all right. Hey Sean, I want to get better at cybersecurity because right now I say I'm cybersecurity focused,
Yeah.
but I'm probably really not, because I don't even know what a NIST framework is.
Right.
What do you tell me when I say I want to get started? I want to do better. I want to do this right. I want to do right by my customers. How do I learn, and how do I actually do?
So I mean, breaking it down a little bit, you've got a few options. I mean, we talked about reading, etc. If you're going after the framework, I think you can get yourself a long way through just reading and really sort of exploring these spaces. Personally, I think once you get past a certain scale, if you can find outside help in terms of a company to help you think about understanding what you want out of the framework and how you're going to get there. If you're gunning for certification, then that's the route that certainly worked for us. We already had a phenomenal base in place. In many respects, we were just confirming it to the world at large that we were there when we did that. But there was still even some learnings in that from our perspective, and there probably will be ongoing. But in terms of, day to day, the day to day stuff that if I was starting out myself in the space, they're kind of the motherhood and apple pie. This really comes down to, things like, just patching everything all the time and making a discipline and a kind of control around that, and making that sort of the basics there. Your own training and training for your customers, whether that's, phishing simulation, awareness of, just awareness of what cybersecurity risks there are out there. There's a lot that you can do there for yourself. I mean, one practice I have, I use Flipboard a lot, and it has some phenomenal cybersecurity magazines. And every evening, when I find myself tempted to do something a little bit less productive, I read that for half an hour. And just every single day, something new goes into my head off the back of that. But it keeps me up to date on what's going on in the world, what types of threats are occurring. Obviously helps drive our own sort of broader perspective in the company. But for me personally, in terms of my learning, that's a great one. I think that, that kind of building, even if it's the basics to start with, thinking about how do you monitor stuff? How do you have eyes on when you're not there, right? And how can it get to you quickly if something is looking a little bit, out of kilter, right? That's another, key basic thing. Another one that I think, from an MSP perspective is really important. As you look at 2FA and MFA are, just the best in terms of, stopping anything to do with sort of, authentication attack, right? They're fantastic. So any back attack will be stopped. Virtually any. So that's another basic one, right? And then finally, backing stuff up, right? These days, more so than ever, right? You've got that challenge of ransomware attack, encrypted data that can potentially be, made public or whatever. That's one type of issue. But the bigger issue that we see with ransomware attacks, is that it takes the business down. The business stops making money. Whatever it is that organization does stops. That's the ransomware. The ransom is one issue, and data loss and so on is another huge issue. But your business not being able to operate is the biggest issue, without question. Right? You have to be able to run your business, and that's why backup is so important. And thinking about what are you going to do there, and being ultra paranoid when it comes to backup. Air-gapped backups is where I would suggest people think of that. It's not hard, not that hard to do. It might be, measure your expense there, storage and costs and all that sort of stuff. But if you can get it somewhere where no one else can get at it, right, and keep it updated pretty regularly, that gives you or your customers specifically a get out of jail, right? If things really go south, right? And of course that has to hand in glove with a little bit of DR every now and then, right? So if you got the backup, it's only as good as you know it is by actually using it in anger to confirm that you could reinstate key services for your customer, right? So thinking about all those different layers, get trained, get ahead of these things, all the way back to down to if something goes really badly wrong, I can still get things back up and running.
I love that, man. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming out here and having this conversation. I'm also really hopeful that to the MSPs that aren't doing cybersecurity or they know they're not doing it as well as they should, you do need to find like a group of people that you can work with that can help you along. It's okay to admit you don't know, but be careful who you admit it to, because if you do it to all of Reddit or all of Discord, you're gonna get some people that are gonna tell you that you should just close your business and just go deliver pizza, because there are people out there that I think that this world has jaded them, and for whatever reason, right? So, find yourself a group of 5 to 10 MSPs that you can sit down and round table this stuff out. Sit down with somebody that's actually an MSSP that has proven that they know what they're doing, and see if they can mentor you. But more importantly, look into ISO 27001 or NIST cybersecurity framework, and figure out which one speaks to you, and pick one, and say, you know what, I'm going to make it my goal. It's still early enough in the year. We're not done with January yet. Let's make it your goal to pick a framework and to start implementing it, and see how far you get in the year, man. Who knows? Maybe you'll like have this like newfound confidence, and you're gonna go out and you're gonna pick up better clients, and you're gonna make more money, and you're gonna charge more, because now you're able to say, hey, we adhere to NIST and or ISO or whatever, right? And we can never guarantee that you'll never get hacked, but we have a lot more measures in place than, let's be honest, the average MSP. And our goal is to safeguard your data.
Absolutely. It's a huge marketing aid, but I mean that in the most positive sense, as you point out, Steve, which is it builds trust with customers to see that you put the effort in, to engage with a framework, to think critically about how you do things, and ultimately that's just so reassuring for your customers that they see you're making that effort, because it's I think it's becoming a standard. I think that's one thing we can say over the last year or two. There's been so much more media coverage around cybersecurity issues, ransomware attacks, etc. It's kind of it's mainstream media coverage these days. It's not a niche thing anymore. So that's putting stuff front and center in everybody's minds, right? The candy store, the dental practice, it doesn't matter. Every business suddenly is quite concerned about this stuff, So I think that is a big driver,
Well, thank you again, Sean. I really appreciate this conversation. Now, let's talk about Ukraine. Here's where I kind of stand. We just had a great. Let me give some feedback. Background first. Gosh, I feel like we should start over. Hi.
Whatever you like.
So, we just had a great conversation about cybersecurity. Go listen to that episode if maybe you just don't feel like you're doing cybersecurity as well as you should. It is geared to the beginner, just to warn you. So Ukraine, I'm in America, and because of that, physically, I'm not really close to the Ukraine. Like you are in the same. Ukraine's still Europe, right? It's hard when it's Eastern Europe, right? Like everything that was east of Berlin. I think all that was USSR, right?
It was certainly the Soviet bloc, I guess.
Yeah,
but they were different countries, I guess, but certainly under the influence of the USSR at the time. Yeah.
Okay. And so to show my age, I'm in my late 30s. So I think a lot of that went away while I was still in like grade school.
Mm-hmm.
So it's difficult for me to understand or fathom what Europe was like when I was younger, back in the 80s and 90s. I've never been to Europe, so it's difficult for me to fathom what it's like now. Here's how dumb I am, and this is me making fun of myself. I see you wearing that brand jacket, and that's the kind where you can hit a button and it heats up like the pockets, right?
No, this one doesn't have that. It's just insulated.
Okay. Well, that brand, they also make, and like the logo lights up to tell you that it's on. So it lights up and it tells you like the hand warmers are on inside the pockets. And I think it might have warmers inside all around the jacket too, but I don't remember. But here's how dumb I am. Wow, they sell that brand over in Europe?
Well, that's the global economy, Steve, isn't it? I think it's the reality. Certainly, I've worked and lived in the US over my career extensively. So, from my perspective, it almost feels like there's no real difference. Obviously, in certain parts of Europe, there's different languages and so on. But the reality is that there's an awful lot that is common across those sort of two geographies, I would say, and certainly it wouldn't seem so different to you if you landed in Dublin or London or Paris or anywhere like that. You'd see a lot of things that you would recognize, right?
I'm sure I would, but I get excited when I recognize things. When I'm looking at somebody's office from thousands of miles away, because I'm still in that, I'm just in this suburb in Ohio. I'm not near like New York City or LA or any of those major hubs of the US, right? Like I'm near Cleveland. Like I'm sure one time it was great, but so I guess what I'm saying is when I think of Ukraine, I have no idea what to think of. Like I think of probably a really cold country in the eastern portion of Europe. It's always cold. It's always dreary. It's always rainy because that's what it always looks like in the movies. And people are sad and hungry. Okay, and not the country. They're actually just starving. And I feel bad. But that is what Hollywood has done to me.
I think that dramatization for sure, Steve.
100%. I'm sure it's a beautiful place. And the cool thing is, like all of Europe, like you guys have had you have such a rich history. Okay, so I want to clarify that this is me being a little silly, and this is me just kind of giving into the stupid American stereotype. Okay, so I just want to clarify that I know Ukraine is a beautiful country with wonderful people, but it's also right now got a lot of darkness going on.
True.
I have not been keeping up on some of the news from over there because the news just makes me sad, and it doesn't give me any hope for the future. So can you please explain? You said cyber warfare, and that freaks me the bleep out. Okay, please explain what's going on and why America should care.
Yes, well, I mean, there's several levels to that, but I'll stick to the cyber warfare part of it, given that's also something I know slightly more about. But so recent hostilities as well, kind of documented in the media between Russia, the Ukraine, and NATO, I guess, more specifically, as well, have sort of started to reach a bit of a fever pitch recently, and there's been a lot of I suppose diplomacy going on between the various camps to try and wind things down a bit, right? That's well covered in the media generally these days. Not looking good, I think, would be a fair summation of things where they are right now, based on what I've read in the last 24 hours. I suppose the other key thing that happened, maybe two things that are noteworthy for your listeners to think about here. One is that part of the initial, I guess, saber rattling that's taken place by Russia has actually involved a pretty extensive cyber attack on both government and commercial entities in the Ukraine. Right. So that's obviously disturbing for folks in Ukraine and those businesses and for that whole country, which is it's a big country, right? But the other aspect of this that's interesting is that the Ukraine is actually a pretty popular location for and has many trade relationships with other countries, including the US, for a variety of reasons, right? So I think earlier today, CISA released, I guess, an advisory for all US companies, institutions, etc., to consider how to harden further your security measures if you have any working relationship with Ukrainian companies or with Ukrainian entities, right? On the basis that they are an obvious and proven already target for I suppose Russian cyber warfare attacks. It's as I think everyone listening to this will know, extremely hard to know how far these things will go, how much of it is distraction from something else, and much of it is part of a broader play. I suppose only they themselves will know that. So then it kind of comes down to what can you do from your own perspective if you happen to have a relationship with a Ukrainian company as a partner in some way to ensure that you're not exposed by virtue of that additional risk that this is going to bring to the table.
So the thing that I think I want to ask is right now there's I mean I think it's been years now because it's really difficult. 2020 was a hell of a decade, right? So Russia is wanting to invade Ukraine. And we think I think my assumption is because Ukraine doesn't it border one of the seas out there that has access to the ocean.
Yeah, so it's the Caspian Sea.
So it's able. Russia does not have any ports on the west that aren't surrounded by like icebergs.
Well, I don't know if that's the issue, Steve, to be honest. I think that it's more likely, from what I read, that Ukraine, it was a Soviet republic, whatever you want to call it, back in the day, I suppose back, as you say, in the 80s. With the breakup of the Soviet Union, it became its own country, and it's been on a journey to becoming essentially a Western democracy over that time, which culminated in a fairly well publicized I suppose war that took place in 2014 within that country, where essentially the people of the Ukraine opted for democracy and so sort of moved in that direction. So now they're a Western democracy, they border Russia on a substantial part of their border, and I think Russia is quite concerned
about the idea of the Ukraine becoming part of NATO, or generally speaking, that sort of close proximity of a Western military presence to their border. Because right now their border includes Poland, which is EU, Belarus, which is a former former USSR state, but still very closely aligned with the USSR, and the Ukraine. Right, there might be another few bits and pieces in the middle there. Not that good at Eastern European geography, but that's
just Americans.
No, well, it is a big place. No, reasonably well, but it's more to do with that type of political. That's the political driver. I'm sure there's loads of nuance in this. I'll be honest, I'm not a geopolitical analyst and CTO, so I definitely want to stay away from what I'm not good at. But it certainly is.
And I do understand that. And I guess all I'm asking is for opinion based, because let's be honest, all the news is anyway. So let's give our cybersecurity analysis of what's happening. So Ukraine is kind of a big country though. So it would make it so that way they are closer to the West if they took over the Ukraine. You know what I mean? So they'd have Romania and Belarus. I think it's Moldova. So MOL period. I'm making assumptions now. Czechoslovakia would be close. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, like all of those would be close. But Finland, Sweden, Norway, are those EU?
Yes, essentially. It's a bit more nuanced than that, but yeah.
Oh, so can you explain that? the quick version. Without offending them.
No, I'm afraid somebody from Finland or Sweden will call me up and give me a hard time. There's kind of layers of membership with the EU, roughly speaking, very roughly speaking.
I didn't know that.
Norway is sort of a member. Yeah, they're a trading partner, and Sweden and Finland are members, right? So I think that's just the nuance there. But you're pretty much spot on there. I suppose the bottom line is it is like all these things, Steve. It's being driven by a variety of factors, mainly driven by I suppose military considerations, and obviously I suppose competing ideologies, as it always ends up being, I guess, in these cases. And there may well be other factors at play, but those are probably some of the big ones. I think the takeaway for us from a cybersecurity perspective is, if you are dealing with businesses in the Ukraine, I suppose there's two things that we're certainly conscious of right now, thinking about this. One is, as CISO has already pointed out, and that's actually a great document. I can find the link after this and post it in the chat if you like. But
that would be great.
Here's the things to think about if you are in that position, and things you could do to up your game if you have concerns, and you should have about potential, I suppose, push through. I suppose that's the thing. The focus from the Russian sort of cyber warfare kind of I suppose or whatever that is, that's it's hard to predict what the implications of that will be for businesses in the Ukraine. So therefore, one should take measures to assume the worst in the short to medium term. The other thing I think would be important to think about, which is less of a cybersecurity issue, just a general issue, is if you have dependencies on businesses in the Ukraine, if things do get I suppose move to the next level of hostilities, what would be the implications from your business's perspective with that, and how do you deal with that, right? So those are the sort of things I think I'd be certainly personally recommending people think about.
apparently you don't mute your microphone to talk. I just thought I'd share that. Oh boy. Well. So the one thing that I remember you mentioned before was you like to stay up on the news, and you use Flipboard, and on Flipboard you just do like a cybersecurity search on Flipboard, or are there specific magazines that you read?
There is
publications, you know what I mean?
I tend to pick out the topics I'm interested in, and that's the great thing about Flipboard is you can search in the I think the term it says what's your passion, right? Very end of the list when you're looking at the app. I tend to use my phone for that sort of stuff. But if you search for cybersecurity there, you can just click on cybersecurity. Then it will give you a subset of areas of interest in relation to cybersecurity, and you can set it up as one of your magazines, and it will just add new stuff in all the time, right? In fact, by the time I've finished reading 10 or 15 articles, it usually says there are new articles in your feed. So you can get there can be a little bit of repetition in the way that the engine works on that to pull stuff in, but generally speaking, it's a really great labor-saving way to get access to what's being published around cybersecurity in the world at large.
I like that. So for those of you who maybe don't use Flipboard, consider it, because that one is I'm going to call it device agnostic. You can get it on Android and iOS, and maybe you're one of those. I'll call you weirdos because you've got an iPad but an Android phone. You can use the same Flipboard account on both. But maybe you're just a great guy like me, and you use Apple everything. I'm sure you can do a cybersecurity search in the Apple News app. In fact, you can. The top result is cybersecurity topics, and you can follow that topic. And it'll give you stories. I'm sure just like Flipboard, everything from Vice and CNN to PC Mag and Entrepreneur. So anything cybersecurity related, it'll kind of group it all together for you. So I like that Flipboard. It sounds like it helps you dig even deeper through cybersecurity. Whereas Apple News, it seems like it's going to very much be if you type in cybersecurity, you're just going to get cybersecurity. When you dig deeper, can you give me an idea of some of the like deeper kind of topics you might find yourself in with cybersecurity?
Think of just a recent example. S-bombs, right? Actually, something that's kind of just starting to come to the fore, I would say, in the last. Well, for me, probably within the last year. So what's an S-bomb? It's a software bill of materials, right? So I guess the question is, what is bill of materials, right? So bill of materials is kind of a bit of a term from a manufacturing perspective, which is all the bits and pieces you need to build something. If you were in a factory or manufacturing or whatever, an S-bomb is actually essentially the exact same thing, but it relates to an application, right? So it's what are all the components that you use to build your application, and that might seem a little bit odd, but these days so much of what makes up everything that we use, every application, as I watched your recent podcast with Steve on Log4j and that particular vulnerability, but that's just an example of an open source package that is highly prevalent in any sort of JavaScript-based development, right? So an S-bomb is a great way for I suppose from a vendor to a customer perspective to share this is what's in the application, and to confirm that we are up to date in terms of that we have no open present vulnerabilities, in terms of particularly the open source or third-party components that might make up a product. But that's a very recent thing that's come up. That's just an example of something that's kind of come up from that sort of feed, Steve, because it's back to the supply chain thing. You've got to be able to trust. If you're buying from TitanHQ, you've got to be able to trust that we've done our due diligence and that we've forced anyone that we're working with to ensure they've done their due diligence, right, and so on and so forth. And that's how you make the supply chain secure.
I really appreciate that. Sean, I thank you so much for coming on and speaking with me today. This has been a treat, and I do hope that you guys will come back and tell us more about products sometime.
I would love to do that. Absolutely, Steve. It would be a pleasure. And thank you so much for the invite to come on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely. And speaking of which, Sean is again from TitanHQ, and can you just real quick, you guys do DNS-based security and filtering, email spam and phishing attack prevention, email archiving, and then encryption. So email encryption. So a lot of email, and then also some web, and fingers crossed, you guys are going to start to get deeper into cybersecurity functions for MSPs.
Absolutely. It's a big focus for us is on a number of fronts, actually. So I think a couple of things are on my mind right now. That's basically one is rounding out our offerings to be more complete on a number of fronts. As I mentioned previously, we're in the closing stages of adding a phishing simulation and security training offering to the company. So there'll be an announcement on that any day now, right? And really excited about that and how it will add to our offering. We're also investing heavily on a number of fronts this year. I guess anti-phishing and really adding further to the technology to really catch those nuanced and ever-evolving trends that come in this space is a big focus for us going into 2022 and beyond. And I suppose the other big area we're focused on actually is that sort of, as I mentioned before, integration, the user experience, how that sort of enables ease of use and configuration and management from an MSP perspective. I know there's it's a big area for us for MSPs. Just be able to track the billing and make my life easy. Right, that's the goal, right? So that is something that's kind of front and center in our minds this year. So that's definitely stuff to watch out for from us.
That's so cool. I look forward to seeing some of the things that you guys release here soon. Sean, thank you again, and hopefully we'll see each other again sometime very soon.
I look forward to it. Absolutely, Steve.